Namaskar. Welcome to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. This edition of the India Foundation podcast features the India Foundation dialogue with Dr. Anupam Sibbil of the Apollo Hospitals Group. The theme of the dialogue is India's handling of the COVID, perceptions and realities. Let's begin.
It's a privilege to be given the opportunity to interact with such esteemed, such distinguished citizens of our great country. What I will do is really share some slides with you because I wanted to share some visuals, and then of course I'd be delighted to be a part of the Q&A. Right. So what I'm going to be doing is really talk about India's response to COVID-19. Well, as it so happens, it's day 500 of the COVID pandemic. Who would have thought that we'd be discussing COVID 500 days down the road? The world has seen 16.1 crore cases, 33.4 lakh deaths, and in India, 2.37 crore cases and 2.58 lakh deaths. While on one hand, we've been grappling with the pandemic, on the other, we've had the infodemic. And what exactly do I mean by the infodemic? I think whether it's our phone, whether it's the internet, whatever medium of communication we might want to be a part of, there is COVID. If you type diabetes on Google, you get 454 million results. We've known about diabetes since 1522 BC. But if you type COVID-19, there are 5.74 billion results. So we know 12 times more about COVID-19 than we know about diabetes, though COVID-19 is only 500 days old. So that's the kind of information out there. Some of it is accurate, some of it is partly accurate, and a lot of it is absolutely inaccurate. Just to remind all of us, nearly 18% of humanity resides in India. And if you look at this map, the combined population of 40 of these countries that I have highlighted in different countries matches up to that of India. We are all familiar with the fact that health is a state subject. We have 28 states, 8 union territories. So each state decides how it wants to manage health, and that applies in significant measure to the COVID pandemic. And of course, with 739 districts, it is really up to the district authorities to decide how exactly they want to roll out policies. Well, it took 55 days to go from 1 to 560th case. And this is important because that's when we went into lockdown. So we went into a lockdown for 21 days. And if we look at 560 as the base, and if we look at a span of 21 days, how did we do and how did the world do? So India went from 560 to 10,363. USA went from 560 to more than 160,000. Spain to 73,000. UK to 34,000. So we did pretty well. The impact, the doubling rate from 3 days prior to the lockdown went to 8 days when we look at 18th April. And the WHO praised the response, describing it as timely, comprehensive, and robust. Arogya Setu played a significant role in guiding citizens on the likelihood of getting an infection or exposure to someone who's infected. And this became the world's highest downloaded app in 13 days. We look at doubling rate as restrictions continued in a different format. The doubling rate in April was 8 days. It went to 15 days end of May, and in July, it was 21 days. So clearly, we were able to hold off the infection. The public and the private sectors came together. Health in India is delivered more by the private sector than the public sector. Nearly 65 to 70% of healthcare in India is private. So we at Apollo launched Project Kutch. We started looking at delivering medicines at the doorstep, doing home testing, took over hotels, managed home care, expanded our bed capacity, went on to social media to educate the public, started teleconsults so that people didn't have to travel, and tried to develop evidence-based guidelines. We developed a protocol that we've now changed 41 times based on the current evidence. And not just us, several different public and private sectors did whatever they could to fight this infection. We ended up doing as many as 10 tests per minute. Now that capacity we've increased to 15. We had 2,100 beds dedicated to COVID, which became 4,200. We were involved in 24 trials to see how we could look at newer medication, and our AI tool, the COVID risk scanner, was downloaded by 16 million people. The Global Indian Physician Collaborative was established by GAPIO, which is the global association in association with the American, the British, the Canadian, the Australian associations. And the idea really was to see how we could learn from each other and how what was being seen in England and the United States, and they were ahead in terms of the infection by about 6 to 8 weeks, what could we learn in India? So the collaborative organized a lot of continuing medical education programs. And because we felt that there was a need, the stress levels were increasing, we had several spiritual sessions with Sister Shivani, with Sadhguru, with Sri Sri, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In fact, for our annual conference, which was held virtually, the Prime Minister sent out a message of encouragement. And if I may quote, our worldview is anchored in our ethos of Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Nirmaya. May everyone be at peace and may no one suffer from illness. Physicians of Indian origin exude this spirit with their competence and compassion. Physicians of Indian origin across the globe came together to fight this pandemic, and Indian physicians played a stellar role overseas and worked very closely with physicians in India. And when we look at the first wave, our mortality rate was 1.43%. From not being able to manufacture any PPEs, we did not manufacture any of them, including N95. We went up to a daily production of more than 500,000 PPE kits. Remdesivir, once it became licensed, we started manufacturing not just for India, but for the world. There was a lot of scientific activity as well. And if we look at PubMed Central, which is the database that houses all published peer-reviewed literature, there are as many as 8431 papers from India. AIIMS has 319. We have 220. PGI has 197. So there was a lot of solid research that took place in India. And then we launched the first phase of a vaccination program, very ambitious, 300 million. And I'd like to remind everyone that this is a very sizable number. 300 million is just 30 million less than the entire population of the United States, and 30 million more than the fourth most populated country in the world, Indonesia. This was a digitally driven, evidence-based, graded response to vaccination, starting with the elderly, after healthcare workers and frontline workers, and those with comorbidities. And if we look at February 2020 to February 21, look at how impressive the fall is. And we were all so happy mid-February when the cases started to drop and dropped less than 10,000 for the entire country. And then, of course, came March and April, and who had anticipated the kind of increase that we saw in the second wave. If we look at April and May, you see here that on 10th of April, the new cases were 1,52,000. And in less than a month, we had gone from 1,52,000 to 4,14,000, which was really the highest. And if we look at deaths, from about 1,000, they went to 4,205. And all this happened in a matter of little over 3 weeks. And this is what the second wave looks like. Really no comparison between the first and the second wave. If we look at the numbers, the peak for the first one was 97,000, 4,01,000 on 9th of May. That is 4 times more. If we look at daily deaths from 1,100 to 4,100, that's 3.7 times. If we look at number of tests, because people said, well, we weren't testing enough, well, the test increase was 1.6 times. And if we looked at positivity rate, it went up from 8 to 22%, which is 2.58 times. The second wave created a shortage of beds. It created a shortage of ventilators, oxygen, which was really not something that anyone had anticipated. And of course, medication when your numbers increased the way they did. Well, what could we have done differently? Well, a second wave was to be expected. If we go back to the Spanish flu, there was the first wave that happened in the summer of 1918. And then came the big second wave, which was in the winter, started in the fall. And then came a third wave, which was less than the second wave, but much more severe than the first wave, which went on in August of 1919. Now let's compare with United States. Now, if you see the maroon line, that's United States, and you see that there was one wave, and then that wave continued for an extended period of time, and then they got a much stronger second wave, and then the numbers came down. So it stands to reason that we also would follow what was happening in other parts of the world, and that is precisely what happened. But of course, the enormity of the second wave really surprised everyone. What is also pretty interesting to note, if we look at the United States and if we look at different states, so if you look at New York and California, so if you look at the first wave in New York and the second wave, there was a significant gap from April to January. If you look at California, it was from July to January. So sometimes the gap between waves varies depending on the geographical region of the country. But what was also very interesting was that it took much less time in California to go up, much more than New York. And the gap between the peak in New York and California was a couple of months, very different to what happened in Florida and Texas. So if you see, there are mirror images in many ways. Peak in July, first wave for both states, and then again the second wave in January. So what happened in one state quickly happened in the other state. What is the lesson here? The lesson here is that if one sees increasing numbers in one part of the country, then in other parts of the country also the numbers will increase, unless there is total restriction of travel, which of course is neither desirable nor practical. And this is what happened in India. Look at Maharashtra. On 5th of March, we had 10,000 cases. And in Delhi on 11th April, so a little over a month, we hit 10,000. Could there have been a prediction? And there's a lot of interesting work that was done, a lot of it from overseas. So let's look at the three predictive models where we have low, medium, and high. And of course, the number of cases are pretty high according to these predictions. But when were we supposed to have seen the peak? It goes from somewhere in March last year to May to July. But when did we see the peak? We saw it in September. So were these predictions accurate? And the answer to that is no. What about the absolute numbers? The anticipation based on this Center from Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policy, 12 to 24 crores. In reality, how many? 2.5 crores. Deaths in lakhs by December 2020, 4.9. And where are we with deaths? 2.5. So clearly, these predictive models did not work in India. And therefore, if we are to look back in terms of saying how well could we have planned, could we have based our planning based on these predictive models, the answer is no. Now let's look at some big economies. Let's look at the US, UK, France, Spain, Italy, and India. Of course, our population is many-fold. Maximum number of cases we saw was more than 1 lakh more than in the United States. But why were we hit so hard? So please, let's spend a minute on beds. Number of beds per thousand in India are 0.55. US has 2.4. UK has 2.6. France has nearly 6. Spain 3. Italy 3. So a lot more beds are available in the developed world. Doctors 1.34 per thousand. US has more than double. UK is double. France has more than 2.5 times. Spain is nearly 3 times. Italy is also 3 times. And very staggering. Look at nurses, 1.7 per thousand. US, 11.7, nearly 7 times. United Kingdom, close to 5.5 times. France, 6 times. Spain, 3.5 times. Italy, 4 times. So if we look at human resources available to manage something like a pandemic, our numbers are really low. If it's in terms of infrastructure, in terms of bed, it's very low. And why is that? Because India doesn't spend on healthcare as much as a nation we should. We spend about 5% of our GDP, of which the government spending is close to 1.5%. And I think everyone who understands healthcare delivery has been demanding for decades now that the healthcare spend has to increase. Of course, in the national health policy, there is a recommendation to take the government spend to 2.5%. But I think we will need much more than 2.5% if we are to match where the developed world is. And clearly the pandemic has taught us the need to spend more. While we were hit hard, it's not that when the first wave hit Europe and America, they weren't challenged. How Corona exposed Europe's weakness. And I'm just quoting some Western literature. European countries face shortage of COVID-19 drug remdesivir. Europe faces ICU bed crunch. Rushes to build field hospitals. Italy dead, overwhelmed morgues as virus tops 8,000. Critical bed shortage is in US hospitals. Japanese region says deaths at home surge. All of us were very disappointed when this aerial drone photo was published on April 22nd this year about mass cremations of COVID victims in Delhi. Well, how many deaths have taken place? 2,263 people died. 306 died in Delhi. What was the highest number of deaths in the US? 5,463, which is nearly 1,300 more than the peak in India. And Brazil was also higher than India. When these images were published, we didn't talk about these. But somehow the deaths in India made front page headlines across the world. There were 800 corona deaths in one single day in New York. Let's look at COVID-related mortality. So let's look at the 5 most effective countries in the world. UK, the mortality figure is 2.88, Brazil 2.78, France 1.86, USA 1.78, India 1.09. So let's look at it another way. Deaths per million of the 5 most affected countries, so deaths per million population. Brazil 2016, UK 1905, USA 1767, France 1569, India 182. What can we do now? There will be perhaps a third wave. We don't know how big the numbers will be, but there will be another wave. Well, we definitely need to improve infrastructure. There is no doubt about that in anyone's mind. Our workforce is getting exhausted. We all know that the vast majority of nurses are from Kerala or from Northeast. They have not gone home for 15 months. We have doctors and nurses and technicians and all healthcare workers managing COVID patients in PPEs where you cannot take a bio break for 6 hours because it takes 45 minutes to remove the PPE and it's expensive. How long can they carry on working at that pace? And when they lose patients, it is really heartbreaking for all of us in healthcare. Our lab capability went up from 14 labs to 1,600 labs. Another 249 labs were added. But I think clearly we've seen with the delay in reports coming out in this wave that we need a lot more labs. We need genome sequencing, and I'm going to touch on this in a bit, but we need this. UK, 10% of all samples are being sequenced. India, 1%. We have the Indian SARS-CoV-2 consortium on genomics, which has 10 laboratories. And earlier this week, a meeting was held to involve more prominent hospitals, even in the private sector, but this needs to go up. What else can we do? COVID avoidance behavior has to become the normal for us. Sanitizing, whether by hand washing or using a sanitizer, masking, and social distancing. We need a robust ecosystem for supplies, whether it's vaccines, whether it's medication, and of course, oxygen. And we need to focus on vaccination. So let me dwell a little bit on vaccination. So this is what is the structure of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And let's look at the spike protein, because that's where a lot of action is, a lot of interest is, and a lot of work has been done there. When we vaccinate an individual, we get the humoral immunity kicking in, which produces antibodies, which we can measure. But we also have the cell-mediated immunity, which we cannot measure in the lab. We have the T cells, the helper, the killer cells that have an important role to play. But very importantly, once we get a vaccine, and if we get exposed to the same or even a mutant or a variant, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, our memory B cells and T cells. B cells are the ones involved with humoral immunity, produce antibodies, and T cells with all the other killer cells will get activated. It's like meeting someone we met a few years ago, and give it a minute or two, we remember how we met them. Now, there's been a lot of interest in variants and mutations. So let me just walk you through mutation. If the amino acid, one amino acid also changes, it's a mutation. The several mutations can actually produce a variant which is different to the original virus. Now, we are interested in variants of interest, and then we are interested in variants of concern. So we might be interested in a lot of variants, but we call it a variant of concern when either there is increased transmissibility, there is severe disease or higher death rate, or the variant is so smart that it dodges the vaccine or it dodges treatment. So these are the variants of concern that we have. And in the spike protein alone, more than 4,000 mutations have been recorded. So we see mutations in flu viruses, we see mutations in all viruses. So we are not worried about mutations, but it's the variant of concern. So we have the B11.7, which is UK, then we have the South African, we have the Brazilian, and then we have B1.617, which has been talked about. It's been referred to as the double mutant because there are two mutations in the spike protein that we just talked about, but there are several mutations. The data from GISAID, which looks at the genomic sequences, has found that this B1.617 is 2.6 times more transmissible than the original COVID strain, but a lot more needs to be learned about this virus. Vaccination. We have been debating vaccination every day. Well, the United States has given 265 million vaccines, and the second in the world is India at 17.6 crores. And then you see that the number drops down to 1/4. Highest number of vaccines administered on a single day anywhere in the world: India 4.3 million, United States 3.38, Brazil 1.14, and then of course it drops. We've been given to understand that the production capability of the Indian manufacturer Serum, Bharat, and the companies that are manufacturing Sputnik will increase considerably in the coming months. We will also have another vaccine. And of course, the conversation is happening with the other licensed vaccine manufacturers, Pfizer, J&J, Novavax, that we should have 130 million doses per month by the end of July. In a report that was published this morning based on a press release yesterday, there are some other vaccines, the BioE, the Bharat Biotech Nasal, the Genova mRNA vaccine that is being talked about, and it is estimated that we will have 2 billion COVID-19 doses by the end of the year. The country is gearing up. I can say from the private sector point of view that we at Apollo with 6,000 touch points have the ability to vaccinate 1 million patients a day. I think we should set about an audacious goal of vaccinating 1 crore Indians every day. Let us show the world what we are capable of, how we as the largest manufacturer of vaccines in the world can scale up like no one has ever done, and how we can administer vaccine that is done at a pace that no one would have ever imagined. We did it with polio, and it's time we did it with 1 crore a day, and that should be our slogan, and that's how we should move forward. With the restrictions that have come in place, you can see Maharashtra April 14th, and then other states, Delhi, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, we are seeing the numbers come down. And as a nation, we are now seeing a significant drop. We want this drop to be as dramatic as the increase was, so that we can finally say that the second phase has come to an end. We can, we must, and we will defeat the SARS-CoV-2 virus and get over this pandemic. And we have to do whatever it takes to protect the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sibal. I think it was extremely fascinating presentation. In fact, it has answered a lot of queries, questions. And I would like to ask you the first question, Professor Sibal, and that is that as far as vaccines are concerned, we allowed Covishield based on UK trials. Could we have also allowed Sputnik based on Russian trials, and could we have allowed Pfizer and Moderna based on American trials? That would have probably given us that sort of a flexibility that when the peak happened, we could have actually got these vaccines, because at this point of time, several states are facing certain amount of shortage of vaccines.
That's a great question, Alokji. And I think what happened was nobody really anticipated the second wave will hit us the way it did. So everyone felt that there was going to be time, our manufacturing ability would scale up and we'd be able to vaccinate, and our numbers were down to nothing, and that we would have a handle on things. In hindsight, I think perhaps we should have, these are extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps we should have looked at emergency use authorization in other countries and accepted that without bridging trials. But do remember that there would have been huge amounts of criticism that how come we accepted data from overseas without doing any trials in India. And there would have been a lot of headlines on, listen, we did not look at evidence in India. Now, when you look back, had we done that, perhaps we would have had more vaccines. And it's not just Sputnik, but it could have been about Pfizer, it could have been about Johnson & Johnson, it could have been about other vaccines as well. But I guess at that point in time, there was a thinking, and with the second wave, I think, everyone's been surprised and shocked. And when we look back and it's always easy in hindsight, perhaps, we should have taken a different viewpoint and, never mind the criticism about no trials in India, gone ahead and done that.
We have a number of people who want to ask questions, so I'll just go to them. Mr. Ajay Ghanti, followed by Jaya Jetli ji.
Sir, thank you very much for an insightful presentation. I was wondering, what is your opinion about the various reports which are coming in, stating that most of the countries, especially the developing and underdeveloped countries, underreporting death. What is your take on that? Taking an example of the deaths that have been reported in the Indian Railways, in the second wave, almost 1,000 deaths, and total about 1,700 deaths. If we take that as a statistical model and we extrapolate, the deaths and the cases have been underreported. So what's your take on this?
So Ajay, I mean, it's really hard for someone, for a doctor who sees patients every day and who's in hospital, to actually predict on what is happening with reporting elsewhere. I don't have the competence or the resources to verify anything. I will go with what is published or whatever is in the public domain. So I will have to rely on credible sources of data that are available, which, each one of us looks at. So I really cannot comment on that.
Jaya ji, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sibal. We are very, very impressed by all the hard work every Indian doctor, not only in India, all the medical personnel are all doing around the world. I had a very small question. You'd mentioned the Arogya Setu, and so much of it was set up in the beginning. But we have found Arogya Setu not working at all effectively. A good friend of mine who was affected with COVID, all her family around her was, and the Arogya Setu showed everybody was fine. I also have checked with people where I was unfortunately standing around people who had got the virus but didn't know it at that time. They knew it 2-3 days later. Nothing showed there. So how effective is it, and how effective is all the digital activity? Because even asking for vaccine slots is becoming a problem everywhere.
Thank you, Jayaji, for your kind words for the medical community and the healthcare community at large. I think it's just the enormity of the size of what we are dealing with. So if you look at, look at CoWIN, I mean, when the slots opened, I don't know how many million people logged in I think in minutes. Even now, when the slots open, you get appointments in a few weeks. The problem here is that we are looking at a very large population size, and there's only that much that technology can handle when everybody wants to do this. In fact, I mean, I saw for the first time in my life, it's always been parents who've looked after their children and taking them for vaccination, because I'm a pediatrician. For the first time, we saw kids trying to get their parents and grandparents vaccinated. And these kids are so tech savvy. So the moment it opened, I think there were millions of people who had logged in a minute. So obviously the app was under strain, and perhaps that might be the case with Arogya Setu as well, that there would have been perhaps issues that were local, and perhaps it was the sheer numbers that I think really pushed strain on an app. And this is very well known. All the tech people know that when there's just so much traffic on a particular app or a website, it does find it hard to be able to sustain that kind of load, and perhaps that's the explanation.
Thank you, Dr. Sibal. It was a most illuminating talk. I just got one question. You spoke about the predictive modeling not really working out during the first wave. I can understand that, but a lot of experience has been gained since then. Now, I want to take your mind to two particular dates. The 1st of March, when India experienced the lowest level as far as the COVID cases across the country were concerned. But since then, there was a gradual rise, and it continued to rise. Now, my point is, we have people in the health ministries, in each of the states. We have the secretaries there. We have the similar staff which is available in the center. And of course, there are many other people who are doing this job. Why could we not raise the red flag at some point of time between the 7th of March and the 21st of March, when it is absolutely clear that things are going wrong and we need to take effective steps?
Thank you. General Saab, I think you make a very valid observation. I think we did lose time. But I think what was not anticipated was the way it would go up. So yes, there were trends out of Maharashtra, but nobody quite anticipated from the numbers that we had in Delhi that in 4.5 weeks, we would get to Maharashtra. I mean, Delhi being a very small state in comparison. So clearly, what we need to do in future, and I showed you examples from Florida and Texas, that sometimes they can mirror each other and can happen in a matter of days, or sometimes you can have the New York, California, where there is a lead time. So if you have people moving from one state to the other, if you have movement, this virus is going to spread. So clearly, if you see an outbreak or you see a wave in one part of the country, it's going to spread through the entire country unless you do something about containing it there and then. So it's a question of days, not weeks, as this wave has taught us. And I think that's a huge, huge lesson, which I don't think anyone will forget, should forget.
Thank you, Dr. Sibal. I think it's been a fascinating talk.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. Do like, share, and subscribe the India Foundation channel.